Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting and educational ICPS Roundtable. My name is Kenny Coogan, and I'm on the board. I am the Community Relations and Education Director for ICPS, and I'm excited to be talking about growing Mexican Pinguicula with you today. We're joined with a wonderful panel, including a chicken. Now, you may notice that I'm wearing a Pinguicula primuliflora shirt. And if you would like to purchase this t-shirt, or if you want to purchase this logo on a tote bag, notebook, t-shirt, sweatshirt, tank top, leggings, you can go to the link below and buy one. And the proceeds from that benefit the ICPS's education and conservation initiatives. This year, we have lots of great conservation initiatives. A lot of has to do with Sarracenia conservation, and then our education initiatives include the monthly roundtables, the monthly webinars, and my favorite, Carnivores in the Classroom, which is where we provide funds for teachers K through 12 in public and private schools all over the world to add carnivorous plants to their classroom. All right, so with that, I will let the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Christina. I am located in Oregon, kind of close to the coast. I've been growing for about 13 years now. I actually have my very first ping I purchased 13 years ago from Sarracenia Northwest. Still, it's a Lawiana. I've come to love Pinguicula a lot. I grow probably more of those than almost any other carnivorous plant now, except for maybe Sarracenia. But they're definitely my favorite to play with, and especially when it comes to like planting them in so many different ways and so many different varieties they have. It's just never ending. I love them.
And I'm Toole, and I live in California, Northern California, on the coast still. And I've been growing carnivorous plants in general for 12 years. I started with pings, and I just kind of bonded to the pings, like just stuck with them. And that's what I focus on. That's what I grow. That's my specialty. And that's what I've been doing. My favorite thing is to cross complex hybrids, the impossible sterils. That's what I do.
I'm Sandy Casey, and I've been growing carnivorous plants about 8 years, and pings included in that. But just the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, got really more into pings, and now I have over 250 different hybrids and cultivars and species, and it's a lot. And so I'm still kind of experimenting with learning how to grow them all. It's a long process of trial and error, learning how to grow them. But I just had my very first self-crossed hybrid flower just this last week, so that was really exciting. It took about almost exactly 2 years from the time I pollinated the seed till when it flowered. And then several years ago before that, I grew some gigantea from seed, and that was kind of what started the Pinguicula obsession. And so here we are, about 250 or so different types later, and it's fun.
I'm Daniela Ribbecke, and I work at California Carnivores, and I'm actually here at California Carnivores right now with Chuck the chicken. She's decided to join us. So I worked at California Carnivores for about a decade, and I've grown pings for that long. Pings have always been really charismatic and interesting to me. I mean, I pretty much love all carnivorous plants. Like Peter always says, my favorite carnivorous plant is whichever one I'm looking at, but the pings are really, really fun. And it's been really interesting to watch the arc of the popularity of them in the hobby, because when I first started, they were really not popular. And they were not something that was, there were not as many hybrids. They were just not as popular. They were not as big of a seller, and they've really, really, really taken off. And we're excited about that because we think that they're something that should be really available to people as houseplants. They make good houseplants. They're fun. They bloom easily. In a lot of ways, they're easier to grow because they're more versatile in their watering and they're a little more forgiving. So it's exciting to see something like take off in the world the way we think it should.
Today's roundtable is going to be talking about Mexican Pinguicula. And Daniela, I've been to Alaska and Iceland, and I have seen wild Pinguicula. So can you tell me why and, well, what are Mexican Pinguicula? What do they share in common, and how are they different from other butterworts?
Well, it's really about the climate that they grow in, right? That's going to really diversify the way we always classify them as temperate, warm temperate, and Mexican or tropical Pinguicula, and that's based on the region in which they grow and the growing conditions that they then require to grow. So the warm temperates are going to be the ones you find in, warmer regions that also get cold as well. Those are going to be the pings that you grow outdoors more. And then there's the temperate pings, and those usually die back to a really hard, hibernaculum, usually because that's their winter protection in snow. They can grow in really harsh conditions, which is shocking and impressive for such a fleshy plant. And then the Mexican and tropical pings are a really different group because they grow in places that have really dry succulent stages for them in the winter, and they can grow in a different belt of heat. And they have a heat tolerance that's different, but they don't want to get cold. So that's a really big difference in that cold tolerance. So the Mexican and tropical pings make great houseplants because they are really good for growing indoors and in typical house conditions, which you can't really grow them outside where they're going to be exposed to most of our normal average cold temperatures. They don't really want to get colder than 40. That's really a big difference. And they do have that succulent stage in winter as opposed to a hibernaculum, which is a very different stage.
The first question we have from social media is from Sergeant Politeness, which is a great name. And they ask, can I grow Pinguiculas outdoors? So is anyone on the panel growing Mexican pings outdoors? All right, Sandy, you want to talk about a species or two or 100 that are doing well for you outdoors?
Well, I live in Southern California, so it doesn't really get much colder than 40 here. So I have a small greenhouse outside, unheated, that some live in. And before that, I had just a shelf of them up against the north side of my house that gets mostly shade, some sun in the summer. And now most of them are inside, but there's still some outside that have been out there for years, and so far they're still doing okay. I kind of rotate. Let's see. I have a gigantea that's been outside for several years. I have a Aphrodite that's been just out in the elements for years. And then in the greenhouse, I have a little bit of everything else, really. And I think the lowest it's got here is maybe 38 or something at night. But that's about it. And so far they've all done okay. Fingers crossed.
I am in Florida, and I also have had a Aphrodite and a gigantea outside for about the past 12 years. And I do protect them when it gets below 40 degrees. So of course it depends on where Sergeant Politeness is living.
Right.
Yeah, they don't do well here in Oregon outdoors. Maybe during the summer for a period, but not long term.
It probably helps that they've kind of acclimated to that. I don't think I'd take one of my inside plants and stick it outside in the winter or anything. So definitely don't do that. But they've kind of acclimated to that over time.
Probably anything also in like a zone 10 or higher is going to be okay, right? Like, because we're in zone 9B,
right,
and we get down to freezing, and so we couldn't really risk it. But they can take a surprising amount of cold if they're insulated a little bit. So if you protect them, you could definitely get away with it in those areas for sure.
We
did ours that way as well, and it got to a point where you're in the same area as we are, that sometimes the temperature drops a little bit lower than you're expecting. It's just not worth the risk.
Because you missed one time,
and oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's a big loss.
Yeah.
Cindy Chang, who was a roundtable panelist for the Biblis talk, sent us a question through social media, and she's asking about temperature, but on the other end, given the range of temperature where the genus grows naturally, what are some more heat and humidity tolerant species? For example, Pinguicula cyclosecta is unique not only for its purple colored leaves, but it thrives in year-round 27 to 33 degrees Celsius and 70 to 90% relative humidity. Are there any other species similar to this?
Well, I would say that just from our experience in the greenhouse growing, stuff like Wesser, Sethos, those are ones that I see that tend to thrive in Nepenthes conditions, for instance, which is a similar kind of tolerance. A marginata can do really well as well, but it can be a little rotty when it gets humid. So you have to kind of watch that. And I think for most pings, that's kind of the danger of the Mexican ping, is that you've got to watch the rotting, and that's going to be the big issue.
I have
But
the
those are
same
two that popped to my mind.
experience. Yeah, I've got a paludarian I put together recently. I just kind of started exploring those, and I actually put cyclosecta and Weisser on the walls of it, and they seem to do okay getting sprayed quite often, but they're also in an area where there's not a lot of moisture to stay on. Like they get sprayed and then they dry. They're not in media, they're just on a wall. So it's interesting. It works, and it's been working for a year, but that's as far as my experience with it can go.
I think pirouettes are another that tends to be extremely forgiving of pretty much any and every conditions. It can be overly humid, it can be a little bit dry. I've even put them in bogs and they do well. They're kind of like the weed of the pings, I would say.
And they're super cute.
Oh, absolutely.
So in my mind, Wesser, Aphrodite, Gigantea, and Pirouette, all like that we've mentioned, are those are kind of like the more common ones, and they happen to be more tolerant of different growing conditions.
Well, and they're also in general ones that don't necessarily do succulent stage, which I think is part of the key. Now, cyclosecta does do a really hard succulent stage, right? So it depends, but there's definitely some correlation there.
Yeah.
All right, so we're talking about growing Mexican Pinguicula, and Evan Durian asks, or says, all of my pings started bringing their leaves upward when I put them in a tank setup. Are they happy? Some are reaching for the sky, and they have 4 LED grow lights on a 14-hour cycle, 80% humidity, and the temperature is 65 to 80. So what do you guys think about Pinguiculas with their leaves up right?
I feel like usually when they start to lose color or they're reaching a little bit higher, the light intensity, it might be a little bit too far away. So they might have the right lighting, but it could be about how close or far it is to the actual plant.
There's also the other factor a lot of people don't think about. They're usually clustering a lot of plants into these tanks, like there's Nepenthes and stuff in there as well, and they're kind of in the shadows of other plants. So they think they're getting adequate light, but they're really getting filtered shadows.
All right, so how strong of a lighting system should we have or can we have for Mexican pings?
Pretty much as bright as you want. I've had some not do well in, direct sun. They can cook, but as far as just lighting, as long as they look okay, you want to make sure that their color is good. They're not green and stretching, but as long as they have good color, if they're supposed to be pink, they're pink. Then your light is pretty adequate. I don't think there's a max on how much light you can give them other than probably not direct sun in the summer. But I don't know. Anybody else?
Well, there's some that don't like overly too much light, like Moctezuma, excuse me if I pronounce the names wrong. And Gina, those ones tend to be a little bit more, don't blast me with light. They get a little less happy with over extreme lights. But I think in general, most pings will tell you if they're happy, like as you said, if they have their color, they'll have their color displays.
That's
And
interesting.
generally,
I have a
Oh, go ahead.
couple of Gina that aren't doing well, and maybe I'll try putting them in less light. That's a good thought. I I didn't know that about Gina. So I'll try that for sure. Thank you.
I was just gonna say generally too, like they love light. Like I grow some like literally like 2 inches from grow lights, and they'll be like so beautiful and deep pink and sparkly. But the other side of that is they're smaller, right? So I like to grow my gigantea in less light because it's going to get way bigger because it already has the capacity to be huge, and I want it to be really, really big. So sometimes it's a little species specific too. So it's good to give a little research and just see that some species do like a little bit less light or will do different things in different light. But generally, if you're seeing those leaves grow kind of strangely elongated, like they said, reaching up, if they're not really sparkly with dew, if they're not sticky, that's another sign that it's not enough direct light. And if they're not coloring up, like you guys said, that's like, those are all the signs that they definitely need more light.
Yeah, I definitely put my gigantea in less light too. Yeah,
It's just more fun.
Yes,
It's
then
more
they
fun,
could be.
right?
Yes,
Yes.
bigger is better with gigantea for sure.
Yeah. Everybody wants to push the limit. Let's see how big we can get these.
Yeah, for sure.
If someone is watching this webinar or roundtable and then they have a species or hybrid, Daniela, where would they go to find if that individual wants more or less light?
I mean, honestly, I just give everything a Google. Like I just start out at Google because like that's where you get it. Like, and then I just start scrolling down and I'll find out where, the ICPS is a great resource for cultivars, but there's not that many pings that are actually published for the ICPS at the moment. So most of them are made in-house by various people. And so to find out more information, if you just kind of Google it, you're usually going to find a lot of information. And then you can also go to the community forums on Facebook and go search in there, go to the search function and like search for that particular ping, and you can find a lot of information that way. Or post in the ICPS forum, I'm growing Gina and I want to know, what your experiences are with light, and see what the feedback is from the community, because that anecdotal information is super valuable.
And definitely don't be afraid to try things. Just trial and error is the best for sure. Just don't be afraid to put it in more light and see how it does, or put it in less light and see how it does. It's not gonna kill it overnight, probably, unless you put it in direct sun. But
now that person said that they have the lights on for 14 hours a day. Do we agree that if the light is close enough or strong enough, do we agree that's a good span? And then how much light do they need for those that go into their winter dormancy? Do they need light? How much light do they need?
I keep everything under the same lights, all whether they're dormant or not. So I don't really move anything depending on that. My lights are on for 13 hours a day, I think. And then I have another shelf that I just turn it on when I wake up and turn it off before I go to bed. So I don't know, but around 14 seems about right to me.
Yeah, I have mine on at 15 hours usually. But yeah, 13, 14 would probably be fine too.
Just keep an eye on your plants and see if they look happy, and don't be afraid, like I said, again, to try different things and trial and error, and whatever works best. They work best in different climates too. It might depend on, if you also have a window there or if you don't, or different things like that. So
just make sure you give your plant enough time in its new setting to actually see the results of your changes, because a lot of people make the mistake of constantly shifting and moving, and they don't know it's actually working because they're moving it too quickly. So every time you move it, give it 2 weeks roughly in that space to see really what you're getting results wise.
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely. Yeah.
Everyone was shaking their head in agreement, Tilly. The people who are watching this will not be able to see the other panelists. So I wanted to mention that, like, literally everybody was shaking their head. Yes. In nature, things go slow. So don't just be whipping around your plant.
I see that a lot because I get a lot of emails and DMs from people asking about plant questions. And that's like a really big issue, is people will move a plant literally inside and outside and all around their house every single day. And then they'll be like, well, what's wrong? Why isn't it responding? And it's like, you can't move it every day and expect it to respond, because plants don't have legs. They don't walk around in nature, so they have to take some time to acclimate. So I think that's like the single greatest tip of the day. That was so smart, because people need to like let their plants get used to things, and watching your plant and learning from your plant and all these experiments will teach you more than anything else.
That's how I learned. I didn't use Google. Oh my gosh, shame on me. I just what should I do? What would nature do? What is nature doing that I'm not doing? And I would just try to duplicate.
That's so smart. That's like the best way to do it.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. Just a whole lot of trial and error, and sometimes stuff dies and then you just buy more.
And you learn so much from the failure, right? Like the failures are sad and they're hard, but you learn sometimes more from the failures than the successes. So as hard
Definitely.
as they are to take, like I always learn so much more from those. And I have killed a lot of plants, like a lot of plants,
Same.
Yep.
Rest in pieces.
Yes.
Don't save the tags. Don't save the tags of the ones you've lost. It's depressing if you find them later.
Yes.
So just move on once you've lost them.
Yeah.
I think you should make a little necklace with every one that.
I don't know if my neck is that strong.
Well, that's how we all learn, and that's how we become successful, by the failures. All right, now this next section of the roundtable, I think, is going to be the most fun. It's about substrate, but it's also about what you can grow Mexican pinguiculas on or in, and how you display them. So let's do the first question from social media is from the Plant Lady SF. I'm always interested to know what people's soil mixes are for Mexican Pinguicula. And then we also have a message from Alicia Kolua. I'm kind of confused about the media for Mexican Pinguiculas. Some like it wet while others not. I personally haven't tried all of it, but the question addressed to everyone: what media do you personally recommend and what media do you not recommend? I have seen some people use Akadama, pumice, lava rocks, orchid bark, etc. So that's I want to hear definitely from everyone. We can just go in a little circle. Do you have a general Mexican Pinguicula substrate? And then for any species or hybrids, do you specialize?
I pretty much plant everything in the same thing, and then just kind of watch them and see how they do in it. Right now, my mix is 5 parts turfus, 4 parts small pumice, 3 parts peat, and 1 part sand. And then I do a layer of sand on the top that I've just started doing this last year or two to kind of combat fungus gnat larva and the moss that grows on top that kind of likes to choke everything out. And so far that's working really well for me. But again, it depends on which plant you're growing. And so some of my plants like it better than others. And it'll also depend on your climate. If you have really humid, then you want less moisture in your mix. So you might want less peat. I live somewhere pretty dry, so I have peat in mine. Some people like to have no peat at all. I've tried having no peat at all, but everything just dried out too fast where I live. So a lot of it depends on your climate and where you live. And so you might have to try a few different things, but in general, they like airy. They don't like to be too wet. They don't like their leaves wet. Yeah. Who else?
I got actually a couple pots right here that I could show. This is kind of a rocky top because some prefer more of like a pumice and lava rock top. And again, like I said, I kind of observed nature. I looked at nature. What is nature doing? Nature works in layers. It's not like here's a solid this and this is all I live in. It's here's a rockier layer, here's a solid, more dense layer, and then here's a water retaining layer even further down. So I build my pots kind of in layers where the top inch here is a mixture of pumice stone, lava rock, perlite, silica sand, and a very, very small amount of peat moss. And then below that, I have another mix, which is, I always forget this one, is silica sand, perlite, vermiculite, and peat moss. And that's all the way to the very bottom. And at the very bottom, I have just a very small, long fiber sphagnum moss to help retain moisture. because where I'm at, it gets very dry. So I do need that extra support to keep them going, but I want the surface top to not be soggy to rot the leaves or roots or anything like that. So it kind of helps keep that moisture up. And then about once a week, I water it and it stays consistent all year. Pretty maintenance free.
I also like to use a mix of like peat, perlite, sand. Crushed pumice is really great as long as everything kind of drains pretty quickly and doesn't retain too much water, like was mentioned before. I really like growing on pumice rocks, even though like the big ones, even though it's not a media, really. I guess it is. I guess it's just a rock. It's really fun for me to grow on those for sure, and kind of design those a little bit up as displays. But yeah, I've grown in sphagnum moss for growing out smaller items. You just have to let everything dry and kind of adjust to, like other people said, what your growing conditions are and how that's going to affect the plants that you're working on.
We have our like all-purpose like ping mix that we always use. And that's all of our soil recipes are always on our California Carnivores website. And we always use like a peat moss, perlite, pumice, sand mix. We do some custom blends for like Montezuma and stuff. And we'll probably actually this year experiment more with specific custom blends for things because Damon's got a little bit more time this year potentially because we have a few more horticultural staff coming on. And so finally like he'll have some time. But you know, we haven't experimented that much with things like akadama and all of that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it could be really great. So like everybody's saying, I think you just kind of have to experiment. The only one that would give me pause in that first list was orchid bark. I don't know how well I think orchid bark would really work for it, but I know a lot of people like, you know, long fibered sphagnum moss for the wetter growing species like gigantea, Wesser, those things as well.
All right, now we have to go around one more time and say, where are you sourcing your sand from? Because that is a very common question and concern. And I will start. I do not use sand. I use black diamond coal slag, which I buy from like a big box store. So it looks like beautiful. It's for sand blasting, but it's actually from coal. And I learned that from some other people from some other roundtables when they were talking about Venus flytraps, but also some Pinguicula. So I just pretend that that's sand, and it's like a very large grain, and it kind of looks like little black diamonds. So it's attractive. And then I don't have to worry about if the sand comes from a beach or if it has like the wrong, you know, elements in it. All right, so where does everyone source their sand from? Or what sand should we be avoiding? Christina, what about you?
I like to play with different kinds of sand. I've used coarse sand, like the larger, but it can be a little bit more expensive. A good place that you might not think to check for sand is a pool supply store. You can actually get pool filter sand that works really good for Pinguicula mix media with just the perlite and peat and some pumice in there with it.
Is the sand called like pool filter sand, or is there?
I believe it'll actually say it's a silica sand on it, I think.
So silica sand is what we're looking for.
Yes, you can get it in bulk at pool supply stores.
You could probably grow hundreds of pings from that.
I get silica sand, pool filter sand. That I get it from Ace Hardware.
Okay.
It's big bags, and when you grow lots of pings, you need big bags. So silica sand, pool sand, yeah, same here.
All right, Sandy.
I have a landscape place by my house that has they sell like the paving stones and landscape rocks and things like that, and they have a big 100-pound, 50-pound bag of just building sand. I use number 16. It's pretty coarse, and so I buy big bags of that. Before that, I was buying some on eBay or Amazon that just says, you know, coarse sand, silica sand. And so any of those work. I like the more coarse sand so that it doesn't compact too much. And so far I like that. But I might try what you said, that sand blasting coal slag. That's interesting. I might have to try that.
Daniela, can you tell us where to get sand from, or are you buying thousands of pounds and
We buy a lot of sand. Yeah. So we have a landscaping place near us where we get some really fancy sands too. Like David and I just went there and sourced some really beautiful, beautiful kind of coarse sand that we're using for our cephalotus and tuberous sundews. So we get specialty sand from them. And it's actually really hard to get because it's for wells. So it's like a whole big deal to talk them into selling us like a bag of it. But we always have to like razzle dazzle it. And they're like, but these plants need it. And then we also get tons and tons of sand from a local nursery place that sells horticultural sand by like 50-pound bags. So, you know, I would recommend checking landscaping supply companies. You know, like the local nurseries often have the ability to order in supplies for you. So they could potentially get you horticultural sand in bigger bags. And then Peter has always recommended that if you really can't find it, you can go to like your big box retail store and get play sand, which is the sand that you would put in a sandbox for children. So that is usually safe to use on plants, but it's always a good idea to give it a rinse just to be thoughtful and safe about weird salts and things in it.
Sandy,
Yes.
this question is for you.
Oh.
Because you mentioned it earlier. It's from Leon McCartney, and they say, how do you deal with the thick layer of carpet moss that forms along the surface of your media? I find it prevents water from reaching my Mexican Pinguicula. So Sandy, because you mentioned sometimes you're also fighting with moss, what's your answer for Leon?
Yeah, that stuff's the worst sometimes. Especially if you're trying to grow small pings or seedlings, I find that the moss grows and then the pings end up getting smaller and smaller and just not happy. So I've started, like I said, putting a top layer of sand, and sometimes I don't put my layer thick enough and the moss grows through, and then you have to kind of pluck it out with tweezers and stuff, or just repot. Or but I think your best bet is some sort of top layer. Like Tia has that nice top layer with more rocks and less peat. That is a good option too. So pretty much any kind of top layer with less peat, because the moss seems to grow pretty much in the peat. And it will affect your plants, especially the small pings. It'll choke out the roots, and you'll notice they're just not looking good, and you can't figure out why. And it could be the moss if you have a lot of moss in there.
All right, to follow up with the substrate section, can some of you share what are some fun enclosures, materials that you're growing your pings in or on or under, or how do you display them?
I'm a big fan of the Pinguicula fountains. That's a fun one. I was also inspired by California Carnivores ping tank and the wall that Daniela helped set up. They did a nice tutorial on that on their website as well. And I kind of put the two together, and at one point I had to have a tank. I do have a tank with just filled with pings and a couple of fountains in there going, and they're fun. It's fun to put together. It's fun to watch grow out and evolve, and it's really low maintenance. It's very low maintenance, which is key. I love that.
So, Christina, some of these pings can be expensive. How do you fund a project like that? Are you just doing a ton of leaf pulls?
Yeah,
And
a
then you
lot of
wait?
leaf pulls. Yes, it's a lot of leaf pulls. When you end up having a lot of pings already, and then if you just take the time, it's really the time to go through and do a lot of different little leaf pulls on little pings. Or if I'm setting up a display, I'll usually have a tray of just plants that are kind of small and grown out that I plan to do something with once like I get striked with an idea. But yeah, mostly just leaf pullings, and very generous Oregon carnivorous plant community that we trade and share plants like no tomorrow. It's a lot of fun.
And if you don't have a local carnivorous plant club or community, you can create your own.
Yes.
All right, anybody else doing fun displays with pings?
I do these little, it's hard to see from that side, but they're little, what I call mini bogs, but they're not really bogs because they're not boggy, they're rocky. And they work really well. for people who like the ping rocks, but they can't really fit a space for them. There's just a bunch of crushed lava rocks, and you treat it very similarly, and they're beautiful and they work great in office spaces because you can move them around where you need to light and everything. They do really well in our physical store. People love them. They don't do so well online, but they do great in the physical shop.
So Tia, those are inside.
Yes, these are for inside. They're indoors specifically, and they're usually in plastic or glass. And we have a very specific design that we use to prevent all the typical issues that happens when you have too boggy of a condition for pings.
We made a Pinguicula wreath once, and that was really fun. So we took a wreath form, you know, that you would use, and we put two of them together, but we stuffed them first with sphagnum moss wrapped in bird's netting. And then just like we created the ping wall, we stuffed a bunch of pings all over it. And it was hanging in the nursery for years. We still have it. We just have to revamp it a little bit, but that was actually super fun. And I'd like to make some more of those. It was really cool.
I remember seeing that and going, oh my gosh, that looks like so much fun to make.
And Daniela, because of the structure, you're watering it once it fully, you're just kind of like spraying it down.
Well, we would like mist it and you know, our hose water comes out low TDS. So we were able to like just hose it down, but then also we would just soak it. So we would just take it down and like literally put it in the water to soak over, you know, for like an hour, like once a week.
I was wondering about that.
All right. Anybody else about a fun display?
I haven't really tried any displays yet. So far, everything's just in pots, and I have several rocks that I want to put pings on, but I just haven't done it yet. I'm scared, I think. Just because I haven't done it yet, and it's a little bit intimidating. I tried putting one rock in a bowl of water, and it didn't wick all the way up. The water didn't wick all the way up to the top. And then I was like, I'm gonna have to spray it every day, and I'm gonna forget. And so I just haven't done it yet. But I'm really inspired by all of you guys, all of your amazing stuff, and I definitely want to do it one day. I just haven't done it yet. I'm scared.
The rocks are really pretty. They're really fun. But I'm like with you with the moment, with all the chaos of like moving the nursery and like having two kids at home to take care of. I'm like, I cannot be missing anything today. So.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It seems like a lot. I'm scared.
But they're beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah,
They are absolutely beautiful. Just a lot of work and maintenance, and if algae or something else happens, it's just kind of a nightmare. I tried it once, and we will not be doing this again.
I think that's why I kind of prefer the fountain. There's a lot of the rocks, if you just put them in stagnant water, you're going to have more issues with the algae buildup, possibly not having a big enough bowl to have it in that's going to soak up the water high enough. But if you just buy one of those really cheap little pumps and just drill a little hole through it, it's such a fun, the only maintenance I have to do is, for the most part, is just filling up the water when it runs low. And then the flow of the water helps cut down a little bit of the algae growth. A good rinse every once in a while doesn't hurt, but for the most part, that kind of helps with some of those issues.
And it's so pretty. Like your setup is unbelievable. It's
Thank
so
you.
beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks.
I think a lot of people grow carnivorous plants for the fact that they eat animals and insects. But for Pinguicula, I think a lot of people kind of dismiss the fact that they are carnivorous and they're growing them because they're beautiful. So Rembrandt Nature asks, what is a low effort feeding regimen for Mexican Pinguicula? And what are some alternatives that don't have to do with MAC-C, because it's very hard to get here in Europe? So how can we push the size, the color, and the flowering for Mexican Pinguicula?
If you can't find MAC-C, I'd recommend finding a different cactus fertilizer. So we actually switched using cactus fertilizer on the Pinguicula. Schultz is the brand we use. It's very low. I think it's 112. And Damon had the idea because he loves cactus, and a lot of his cactus grow in the same region as the Mexican Pinguicula. So he was doing some research and he was thinking about it, and he decided to experiment with using the same fertilizers that he uses on his cactus on the pings, and we saw a really, really beneficial reaction. And so if you can't find Maxi in your region, I would recommend looking for a nice low cactus fertilizer and experimenting on a ping or two. Try it a few months in a row and see how it reacts, because the benefits of fertilizer are going to far outweigh anything else that you do. So it's worth it if you can find that in your area.
And
I
Daniela,
also switched. Oh, sorry. I also switched over to the Schultz. It's
It's great, right?
and
Yeah, it is.
Christina and Daniela, what's your, how much are you putting in a gallon of water, or how often do you spray the solution?
I go by the recommended amount, but I am not on a good spraying routine. Honestly, it's kind of like when I look at him and I go, oh, I should just give these guys a little extra love, and then I'll get to it. If I did it more often, I would probably have better results.
And Christina, how forgetful are you? Are you doing this are you remembering one time a week or one time a month?
I would say a month. Yeah, it's spread
Okay.
out. Yep.
Okay,
I got mom brain.
so full
Yeah.
full recommendation, but like once a month you're spraying, like misting the leaves.
Misting, yeah, I missed. Yeah.
And Daniela, what about California Carnivores?
Same, follow the directions on the package, and you can do it like twice a month. I mean, you could push it to once a week, but you might start to see some adverse reactions. I would really be cautious and experiment on 1 or 2 pings if you want to push that, but twice a month would be fine.
Is anyone else using something else to fertilize? Is anyone breeding fruit flies purposefully?
I will recommend to people, I use Maxi myself, but I recommend to people who can't get access to any of those or are afraid to use those, or just looking for the experience if I want to feed it something, to go to your local pet store and get some dehydrated bloodworms, rehydrate them just a little bit, give them a time to soak it up, let them to the side, let them air dry a little bit so they're not soggy, and put them on the leaves. Some pings actually do curl around them, so there is an experience in feeding opposed to just misting with fertilizer. So I get why people want to do it.
I have a fungus gnat outbreak every once in a while that helps. And other than that, I try to use that Schultz cactus fertilizer like I saw in a video from California Carnivores, and that seems to work really well. But like Christina, I often forget to do it. And then every once in a while I'll go, I should really do that sometime soon. And then but yeah, it works really well when I remember to.
Our next question from social media is from Bajan5. Is there a trick to get cyclosecta to make a single plant from a leaf pulling? My leaf pullings are putting out multiple very tiny plants, but previously I've been able to get a single larger plant from a pulling. Is this just random? The ambient temperature is 70 degrees, 50 to 60% humidity, and they are propagating it on a rock. And I don't know if this is because of California Carnivores, but I love how every question they say the temperature, the humidity, and the substrate. So I don't know if you've trained them, Daniela, but that's nice. Thank you.
It's very helpful. It's
Yeah.
very helpful.
So what causes a leaf pull to cause lots of little babies versus one big one? Do we know?
I have no idea.
So when you, panelist, when you propagate from a leaf pulling, what do you see? Do you usually get one plant, a new plant, or do you get lots of little babies?
I think it kind of depends on the plant a little bit too. Like some are going to produce a lot of little babies on one leaf, and others are you're going to have more oftentimes just one. I couldn't tell you what makes that happen exactly though.
No, this kind of stumped me.
I know some species do tend to, and cyclosecta is one of them that tends to kind of clone in clusters. Snosberry does it too. It's just that's what they do sometimes.
I mean, I would assume it's a hormonal trigger within the plant that's telling it to do that, but I'm not sure what environmental triggers you could do to manipulate what it would be doing clumping versus a single large one. That's definitely that stumps me. I don't know that I've ever observed that particularly either. So.
And why complain that you have 5 new plants rather than 1 new
Yeah,
plant?
it's a good
Right.
problem. Good problem.
Yeah. All right, we have a couple more questions from social media. This is from Dreen Nunez. How long does it take for the Mexican Pinguicula to get out of the succulent stage and go back to fully pink again? I've been using grow lights on my pink for 2 months now, and it changed a lot after a month, but it hasn't changed past what it's looked like a month ago. Do they need to do something else? So any recommendations for getting a Pinguicula out of their dormancy succulent stage?
I mean, honestly, I find that pinks can be quite stubborn, and we'll have some that will just stay succulent for literally like a full year, and they'll just be like, no, I like this, I refuse, I'm happy. And you can do everything right for it, and they just don't want to do it, and they have to do like a whole full cycle. I've had them go 2 years like that. I know Lawiana in particular is prone to doing that. I don't really know why. I've asked Damon about it. He's really not got a bunch of tricks up his sleeve. All you can do is increase photo period, increase water, and as the growing period goes on and you get more into summer, you can fertilize. But if they don't want to come out of that state, there's not that much more you can do in my experience. But I don't know if you guys have other experiences.
I've had the same situation. I had a colomensis go to sleep, if I'm saying it correctly, not come out of hibernation for like, it felt like 2 years. I mean, I took pictures of it all the time being like, this is my one that just won't wake up for me. But then I have others that are triggered really easily, like macrophylla, for example. Increasing water on that one, almost immediately it will start shooting out larger leaves and come out of its, I don't know if that's complete. Is that a Mexican Pinguicula? It's an interesting one that has a bud shape and dormant.
It is,
yeah.
but it just like buries itself. Yeah.
Yes, it does. It looked, or a little pine cone in there. But yeah, that's one that, again, like Daniela said, if lighting is increased, if watering is increased, it can definitely help kind of, hopefully, but again, some of them are stubborn.
Talk about my 3-year dormancy, Gypsicola. Or not, let's not talk about it. Sometimes they just don't wake up. They're very interesting. They decide. I always compare them to cats because they do what they want. They really do.
Exposure to any natural sunlight in a windowsill can help, because plants always know from natural UV light, so that can help. So if you're growing them entirely like in an enclosed grow chamber where they're not getting any natural sunlight, sometimes if you can get them in a windowsill, that can actually change their growing, because they just can tell from the UV what's going on, what time of year it is. So that's the only trick that I know that sometimes works.
So I know that there's a lot of species in what we're talking about. And then of course we have complex hybrids, simple hybrids, but can we generally say, maybe just from anecdotal experience, how you water the Mexican pings in the winter and in the summer? Are we using the tray method? Do we water them, let them dry out? What is our water regimen? Daniela, want to go first?
Oh, so we have everything in trays just because we have a lot of things. But in the winter, Damon generally waters from overhead with a sprinkle water can. So he does still water from overhead, just as if it's like a natural rainstorm. And he will let a little bit of water build up in the tray, but we don't generally water into the trays in the winter that much. And then when we start to see the leaves changing, which is usually around this time of year for us, then we would start watering into the trays.
Okay, so for those of you who have terrariums or indoor setups, how do you water your collection?
Top water. Some of them, I can't get around it because there's so many plants packed in one, which I'm going to have to pull apart at some point to get to some of them that are hiding in between each other and just outgrown the space. But yeah, the only way to get that water is just for me to straight top water on it. And they seem to do okay. As long as you let everything kind of really dry out in between and you're not keeping them constantly wet.
I just tray water also, and right now I just have everything in trays, even if they're dormant or if they're hypernacula or all of them are just in trays. And when I notice the tray's been dry for a few days, I water it maybe half full or a little more than that. And I have tried letting things like gypsicola dry all the way out till they're bone dry. And then that's when I lost them. That's when they rotted for me when I started watering again. And so now I just keep everything watered the same all the time. And that seems to work better, at least in my conditions. I just make sure I let the tray dry for, like I said, a few days or so. And so that works better for me than letting everything go completely bone dry while they're asleep.
Similar to Sandy, I also tray water. I have 2 separate locations in greenhouses and they're an hour apart. So for me, like I'm at one location for part of the week and the other part of the week I'm at the other location. So tray watering really, and that's why I have such a specialty mix of my dirt, because it's really the best method for me to manage 2 greenhouses and 2 separate locations.
All right, we have
I'm a little
another.
obsessed with your dirt, honestly. I'm a little obsessed with that. Like I'm gonna have to tell David all about it. It's so cool.
That is cool.
We have a question from Maggie's Shop of Horrors.
Oh,
How?
Maggie.
Yes. And she will be in a roundtable coming to you soon.
Look forward to it.
Yes. And we can imagine what roundtable topic that is. All right. Her question is, how do you deal with brown heart disease? Daniela, can you tell us what brown heart disease is? I imagine it dies from the center of the plant.
Yeah, you'll see the center of the plant start to turn brown and it's going to rot out and die. It's fungal in nature generally, and it's one of the things that things are susceptible to is the fungal diseases in general are probably the biggest single problem for Pinguicula. And it's a tough one. Usually once you see it happening, there's not any saving of that plant. What you can do at that point is try to pull some leaves that are unaffected and do leaf pullings from your plant. It's also the reason that we recommend always taking leaf pullings off every plant every year as an insurance policy, because it can just hit out of nowhere. You never really know, these plants aren't going to live forever. So it's a really good idea to take leaf pullings every year for your whole collection, so you always have more coming. We do treat for any fungus that we see, obviously coming up, any problems in our trays, we're going to treat with, we like medallion. That's what we've been using. And you also want to be really, really careful if you notice anything like that going on. You want to remove those plants if they're planted with other plants and then go wash your hands immediately. You don't want to be touching, one ping and that's dying and then touching other pings. You could be potentially spreading pathogens around. So you want to remove anything that's dying, and you want to then kind of sterilize your anything that you've touched.
All right, Daniela, I'll ask you this too. It's also from Maggie, but it's also from Philip. How do I get rid of thrips on my Mexican pings? And what are some safe insecticidal preventatives?
Oh, I've never heard of anybody getting those on pings, to be honest. Normally we see those in
Congratulations, Philip.
Yeah, I've only ever those are really associated with like pitcher plants. I see those on Sarracenia and cobra plants specifically in the summer. And I have a list on California Carnivores website of every single insecticide we'd recommend for all of the different pests. So I would just check there. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what we use for thrips. I just never, Damon always remembers all those things for me. So I don't ever remember. I could shout to him right now. But Damon, what do we use for thrips? Spinosad. Monterey Bay. See, he's my keeper of the knowledge. I keep up the website. He remembers all the things. But I've never seen those on pings. They won't be able to hear you.
I don't know. I've never seen them on pings. I feel like if they were on pings, their pings would be dead.
Yeah,
before you know
it'd be but yeah, aphids. You could see aphids on pings though. That's very likely. And then you can use takedown or bear.
Very good. And if Maggie and Philip go to the International Carnivorous Plant Society's YouTube page, they can watch a Q&A from Damon and Daniela all about, it's a Q&A, but then also Damon did a full pest webinar. So, and all of those things that are on your list are also on our list now. I'm going to ask everyone, but I'll ask Sandy because she mentioned that she grew some gigantea from seed, and maybe a month, because I'm in Florida, I don't know if because I'm in Florida, but all my pings were flowering about a month or two ago. My gigantea that's 12 years old, I have two plants that are bigger than an 8-inch pot, and I can't get any pollen. They have maybe 6 flowers, and I cannot find the pollen on those plants. So what is going up with that? Sandy, you want to start? Or where did you find your pollen from your gigantea?
Gosh, I don't know. It seems like it's environmental. Sometimes when it's warmer, they have more pollen. Seems like I heard somewhere, but I don't know. I just kind of sometimes it takes a few days after the flower opens for them to get pollen. Sometimes that happens to me too. I just can't find it, or it's not there, or I don't know. I'm not really sure. It just sometimes they have it and sometimes they don't. And I don't know if it's just the timing that I'm looking, or like I said, the environmental factor, or what. Daniela's shaking her head. She knows something. Tell us.
Yeah, when
Oh
I
no, I
when I
agree with
asked,
you. Yeah.
I also saw other people in agreement. So Sandy, did you have one individual plant? Did you have multiple flowers? Is that how you got the seeds?
Yeah, I have. Well, I bought the seeds of the original one, but I have made my own gigantea seeds since then with the seedlings from the original, and I just used like the purple flowered plain variety that I grew from the seeds, and then I also have an alba, a white flower form. So I just crossed those.
And you're sticking like a pencil in there or something?
I use a toothpick, and I use a Sharpie to make the end black so that I can see the pollen, and just use the toothpick and put in and then point the tip up a little bit to scoop the pollen out from underneath.
I'll add that my temperature outside is 60 to almost 90. So like nighttime is 60, daytime is 87, 90. So does anyone else know why my Pinguicula, I think each plant has probably had 4 to 6 flowers, and I have not been able to find any pollen. Anyone else?
I've also had a hard, I've never cross-pollinated successfully that I'm aware of, unless I missed a seed pod pop open. I've tried many, many times. And I've also tried with Gigantea and noticed myself, and with the hybrid Alfred Leu, and noticed that there's also not very much pollen with that one on mine. So maybe it is just the type of Pinguicula that doesn't produce quite so much pollen as some. I know like Emarginata, stuff like that is going to give you a lot of pollen in my experience. So it could be actually the type of plant,
The
or these
species.
hybrids. Yes.
I tend to do a lot of pollinating, maybe 3 or 4 times a day. There's jokes about it, but I'm busy making lots of pings all the time. I have noticed through lots of pollination, the gigantea seems to have lesser pollen, and it is located deeper in the flower than most other types. I pollinate differently than anyone else I know. I use tweezers and moss. Because again, I thought, what is nature doing that I'm not doing? Insects, they have little fuzzies on them. So when they're crawling in there, their fuzzes are catching the pollen. So when the flower doesn't have a lot of pollen, I will use moss because it's guaranteed to catch it and hold on to it. And then I'm going to remove the pollen from the plant that I don't want it to get contaminated with. And then I'm going to put the pollen inside that plant. It's a large process, but I have gotten some really, really interesting complex hybrids doing this method.
All right, well, I'm going to go outside and do that right now because I still have flowers.
No, I just agree. It's notoriously difficult. It's one of those ones that like you would think it's got such a big flower, this is gonna be easy, and it's always like, where's this pollen? No, it's always like that. Yeah.
I hand pollinated Pinguicula planifolia, which is not a Mexican ping, and that was a couple months ago, and I had like 100%. Every single flower turned into like this big massive seed pod, and they all busted open and they released their seed. And then I was so sad about my gigantea.
I'm curious what everybody grows their seedlings in. I've been doing experiments with different media to grow my seedlings in. And at first I tried just like peat and perlite, but they get overgrown with moss so quick. And so now I'm using peat and perlite with a layer of sand on top. So far that seems to work, but it's hard to keep them from drying out. And so I'm just wondering what everybody else does and how it works. Tia?
Seeding tray, it's right here. Just made one, so let me grab it. Okay, this is my portable one because I need to have a portable one, as I said, with 2 greenhouses. It's a layer. The bottom has some long fiber sphagnum moss that I've chopped, a very thin layer. And then at the very bottom, I also have seeding pads, those little cotton pads you put underneath to prevent it from drying out. And then on top, it's mostly vermiculite and silica sand with just a little bit of peat, like very small amount of peat to help retain moisture. I don't grow moss, doesn't get moss on it. These little seedlings here have been growing for 2 months and there's not a spot of moss going. So it seems to work really well that way. And I always have a seeding heating mat too. People are struggling with that.
We often sterilize our soil in an Instant Pot. So I brought my old Instant Pot in here, and so we sterilize all of our seeds soil in that, and that really reduces the moss for a while, and especially if you keep it then sealed, right? So what Damon will sometimes put the seeds in little tubs, and then he will seal it over after he plants it in. And even though some moss spores are going to get in it, because we've sterilized it, when we seal it, it really reduces the moss pretty substantially as those seedlings start to take and grow.
Perfect. Thank you both.
All right. Well, thank you so much, panel, for entertaining us and educating us. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's not a surprise that gardeners, educators, and scientists are fascinated by these unique plants. The International Carnivorous Plant Society, or ICPS, not only love these plants, but welcomes growers just getting started all the way through professional scientists. The ICPS even started an annual World Carnivorous Plant Day to celebrate them. The free online event is held the first Wednesday of May. Take a look around our website and you'll find historic documents about carnivorous plants, growing guides, free educational resources, and more. Have questions? Ask. We don't bite, but our plants do.